Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwukta.
This is Merps. Hello, hello. Once again, we are recording this a little bit earlier than usual. It's because this is a Super Bowl Sunday. That kind of clashes with our normal time. So if something happens from now, which is Friday night, in between now and the Super Bowl, we're not responsible for it. That's basically it.
Yeah. And in case you're wondering why, even we take some holidays when we do this and we do early recording, and Super Bowl in the US really is like a holiday. I know some people don't. It's hard to get it, I think, unless you're in the US, just how much of a holiday this day is on Sunday. Like things just
Right.
shut down.
Even people that don't watch football
Mm-hmm.
will watch the Super Bowl. It is one of those things. And then even if you don't like football, you like the fact that it gets everyone together and eating food, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's become like a
It's a
second
it's a
Christmas
social
or
activity.
something.
It's like the
Yeah.
opposite of Hearthstone, which they try really hard to make a social activity, but none of my friends besides Merps will ever play it again.
No.
Got sad.
And I mean, we talked about this before. I can't realistically recommend it to anyone. I can recommend Arena, but I'm like, all right, you got to really practice
Yeah,
at this.
yeah. You got to really go for it.
Yeah.
Um, all right.
So, all right, let's
So,
talk about news. You want to talk about news first?
yes, it's in giant font below here if you're watching the YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast and you haven't heard the news from this week, nerfs are coming. And this isn't like nerfs are coming with the next rotation or, something that would actually make sense. These are nerfs that are coming, and one of them, I don't know. I don't know why they're doing the nerfs at the nerfs at this time, but they are. It's going to come with the next patch, whatever that means. But probably what it means is next week is going to be the patch because they announced it this week. Anyway,
Right.
two cards that really heavily impact the arena are going to be nerfed, and then two cards that don't really matter because their legendaries are also going to be nerfed. Some of these are also rotating out for next expansion anyway. So it's
Right.
kind of like, it's big news in that they're nerfing actual cards. It's not big news in that it's not really going to affect a lot of stuff outside of these two cards. So first things first.
Well,
What is
let's get rid of the two cars that don't really matter,
Oh,
right?
so we're going up backwards.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
we'll
yeah.
build this up.
That just makes sense.
All
That
right.
just makes
All
sense.
right. Let's
All
let's
right, so
not give them what they want. Let's give them what they don't care about.
so I will talk about these two cards because we can easily dispatch of these, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, the first one is Raza the Chained, which is a priest legendary. For those of you who are unaware, it's a 5 mana 5/5 with Battle Cry. Currently, that says if your deck has no duplicates, your hero power costs 0 this game. Very powerful in constructed with Machine Gun Priest, right? Paired with Shadow Reaper Anduin. And in Arena, still a good card. And it will soon be changed to still 5 mana 5/5, but Battle Cry says if your deck has no duplicates, your hero power costs 1 this game, not 0. Are
This
you
is
still going to draft this?
Yeah.
Sure, you're still going to draft it.
This doesn't matter too much to the arena. The ability is like okay, it's not that great, and the ability's still gonna be okay and not that great, even after it becomes 1 mana instead of 0.
Yeah,
So yeah, yeah, and it's also it's Raza. You're gonna pick it most likely.
yeah, yeah. Anyways, the next one,
Oh, that's so
obviously
sad.
geared towards constructed. They are nerfing Patches the Pirate, which was previously a 1 mana 1/1 with charge, and after you play a pirate, summon this deck, or sorry, summon this minion from your deck. Summon this deck, jeez. And now, afterwards, it just won't have charge anymore. It's a 1 mana 1/1, and you can still summon it after you play a pirate, but if you draw it, it's a 1 mana 1/1. Worse than Stone Tusk Boar,
Let's
worse
talk
than
about the biggest
Venus.
crime of this card.
Yeah, his voice.
He says, "I'm in charge now." It's
Hmm.
built into the very soul of the card.
And that's why they're changing the soul. I don't know if you saw this, but Mike Dene came in to Reddit like thread post and said they are changing the voice line for Patches.
Very consistent on Blizzard's part to do that because I think that was necessary. Like I was going to be very disappointed if they kept that voice line. Like that would just make people sad, and that's not what the game is about. Okay, the game should let RNG make you sad, not the actual voice lines. The voice lines should all be making you happy.
I will say There is one unanswered question though, because when people ask us like, "Wait, what about his voice line?" Blizzard came and sort of reassured everyone, "Okay, that's going to be taken care of." However, right now there is like Patches the Pirate is part of a charge package
Oh
in
yeah,
Dungeon
a
Runs,
dungeon run.
right?
They'll
So
probably
they
fix that at some point pretty easily.
probably,
Yeah,
yeah.
they can't be that hard. But yeah, that's true. That is going to be sad for Dungeon Run. In terms of like when you're going to draft this card, this was never a good card to draft unless you were playing Rogue and like maybe vaguely Warrior, but not even really. And now, like you might think that this totally destroys the card, but it actually doesn't. Like what's good, like Patches is actually fully on the most recent version of the algorithm, and we like plugged it in and played around with it. It's not going to actually drop it by that much. I think people may overestimate how much it drops it in the classes that actually like have and want pirates. Yeah, so just don't be shocked if you look at the tier list afterwards, and Patches is still like over a 100 in Rogue because it's still a free 1/1 of tempo on the board, like most of the time, right? Like just out of thin air.
Yeah, it's just yeah, we'll see where it lands. But obviously, this card is like the nerf was all constructed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It only had constructed in mind, much like Raza as well. It's like, did you really care in arena whether it's like 0 or 1? It's like, yeah, sometimes it matters, but a lot of times it's like, no, it's just doesn't really matter. Like a reduced cost is a reduced cost.
Yep.
Anyways, that's where we're at with the two legendaries. Um,
Let's
shouldn't matter.
yeah, let's talk about the two cards that are very meaningful. They have the same offering rates right now in the current meta, or very similar offering rates, because one is a KNC card and the other one is a older card. So let's talk about the KNC card first. So one thing I'm going to preface with is I like the fact that all of these nerfs are to cards that were above average in Arena, so that even after the nerf, they're still okay in the arena. This is not like a Warsong Commander thing where it was like just fine in the arena and they totally destroyed it for a bad class, right? These are like, no one's going to complain about Raza or Patches being nerfed, and these next two cards, no one's going to complain about them being nerfed in arena either. So it's going to like ultimately end up being a good nerf, I think, for the arena too, even if they probably weren't thinking about arena. So next one, Merps. What do we have? Epic from KNC.
Ooh, okay. I mean, this is the one that spawned many memes. This is the one that probably made players break a lot of tables. We're talking about Corridor Creeper here, a card that all of you should know, but I'll say the stats once again. It's a 7-mana 5/5 beast that costs 1 less whenever a minion dies while this is in your hand. And now that means any minion on their side, on your side. So that was pre-nerf, or that's Corridor Creeper in its current state, and it will be nerfed to a 7-mana 2/5. So it used to be a 5/5, now it's a 2/5.
Now it's a carry-on grub that instead of costing 3 will cost either
Variable.
more or less, but
right.
you probably can't play it on turn 3 in the arena.
Exactly.
So that's 3 less attack. That's a pretty big drop for a card with only 10 stats. I think in constructed, people immediately go like, "Oh, it's totally not playable now," so whatever, which is fine. It's still going to be a playable card in arena.
Now, right now we have Corridor Creeper at a super premium level.
So
right?
I'll give you a hint. Like the two cards that they're nerfing now that are not legendaries are literally the number 1 and number 2 rated cards on the Lightforge in neutral. So like, there's a reason these cards are getting nerfed. They were actually just blatantly overstated beforehand, and even Arena feels it. So they're not synergy cards or anything like that. So Corridor Creeper was a 157, and this next card is going to be a 159. But before we get to that, and so I'll also go down. The one card that they're not nerfing, the new number 1 card in the neutral category, is going to be Primordial Drake again. Because apparently these other insanely flip the game cards are too powerful, but Primordial Drake is always okay. Freaking.
Well, you could see how Primordial Drake isn't a constructed problem. Like it actually doesn't do enough.
But it's so
sometimes
bad.
when
It's worse
constructed.
than the other two for Arena. You know what? I don't
In
even mean
Arena,
that.
yes.
Corridor Creeper is probably worse than Primordial Drake in the Arena. Because Corridor Creeper is like one of those, you can't play around it. It's just a stupid, like, +5 tempo onto the board, like, situation.
Right. You can't even make a read because you
Mm-hmm.
see it's like, okay, this guy hasn't played the card from turn 1 to turn 5. It could be a mind control,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be an additional 5/5, in which I'm just like, I can't,
Yeah.
like,
And it's not
and
synergizing with anything. It works in every single Arena deck. Like, Corridor Creeper was horrible design for the Arena.
yes.
And it is actually, because of the offering rates, yeah, I think it, I'm going to do some quick math in my head right now, but which means it's probably wrong. But I want to say that it is offered in 75% of decks on average. Um, yeah, like the average deck, it's probably less than that, but the average, because you could get duplicates, but the average deck will have 0.75 Corridor Creeper or something like that. Somebody could check on HS Replay for what the actual number is, because everyone faced with the Corridor Creeper will take it. So we can actually get HS Replay stats on it if we wanted. And any time you have this card in your hand, you will end up playing it, and unless it's a top deck, it will swing the board by 5 tempo. Like, that's huge.
Right. Like when this card came out, because first of all, when I first read it, I just sort of, there were a lot of cards, right? So when I first read it, I was like, oh, it's not that great. Because my brain automatically was like, oh, it's on your side, right? And I was like, oh, okay, it's decent. And then once I
Your
figured out
brain
it was,
automatically added the word friendly because that would actually make some sense.
that would actually make sense. And then once it was the other way, I was like, Blizzard, you shouldn't be making
Yeah,
this
right?
mistake.
Like, it just, when it came out, it felt like an overpowered card. We had it rated insanely high when we first, rated the card before the expansion even came out. And then we had to actually, like, raise it by, like, another 10 points because it was even more insane than the insanity that we thought it was before.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I mean, the win rates back it up. It's a bad card in the Arena. Arena is about, like, it used to be about, remember back in Classic, Dark Iron Dwarf was one of the best cards in the game. And I mean, it still kind of is, neutral-wise. But it's because you can at any time swing by 2, right? That was your general range that you can work with. And that's why in Classic, it was always very on the board, very much like, a predictable kind of game, because you can only realistically swing by 2. Even a fireball, what does a fireball do? It gets you 2 extra tempo on the 4 you normally get, right? And that's a pretty premium card back in the day. Now that's all kind of out of whack, but Corridor Creeper is a guaranteed 5 swing. Like, that's not just like way more than the max normally gets you with little to no downside. That's like 2.5 times more than the old max.
Right. And I would say part of the skill in Arena is always, and we've talked about this in many podcasts, like how much can you expect from your opponent next turn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's always, some limit to it, or some condition to it that you can
Yes.
somewhat manipulate, or some read that you can make. Corridor Creeper just breaks all the rules. Like you can't make a read
Mm-hmm.
on it at all because it hides itself as the exact opposite card, right? It hides itself as like a mind control. They're like, oh, he didn't want to play this card at all. It must be a clunky card,
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly it's a 0 mana 5/5. And there's no way to really play around it, right?
Yeah.
And then so if you play slow and you're like, okay, he's on turn 6, he can put out around, let's say, like 7.
It totally screws everything.
Right. He can put out like a 6/7 or 7/7 worth of stats, and then suddenly he adds an additional 5/5 to that, and then like if you don't have like the big clears, you're kind of screwed.
Like, think about it this way. Meteor is an insane card that should not exist, right? Like, we all agree that it was kind of designed to be that. What Meteor is an assassinate plus a maximum potential of 6 extra damage for 1 extra mana. So, in other words, it at its maximum capacity, if your opponent positions, one, has 3 minions, 2, positions them in the exact wrong way, you are getting the value, effectively, of Corridor Creeper. I'm going to rephrase that.
Kind of.
Now the
Right.
base starts higher, right? Because Assassinate's a way better card than a regular 5 mana 5/5. But when you're comparing the amount of over tempo that you're looking at, like Corridor Creeper is just a very poorly designed card. Like even within premium cards, it's more poorly designed. I'm not saying Meteor is worse than Corridor Creeper, but I'm saying starting from the base of where it's going for, they're trying to make Corridor when they do something like this, they put Corridor Creeper into the premium spells zone, right?
Right.
Rather than the minion zone.
Now, let me ask you a question, because right now, after the nerf, it'll be a 2/5. A lot of people are saying, "Wait, this is too much. Like, couldn't you just even make it a 3/5?" Like, what do you think about that?
Why? Like, it's a bad game design card. It should not exist. Period. For game design purposes. So yeah, nerf it out of existence. I don't mind it being nerfed out of it. It doesn't affect class balance at all. It's a neutral card. It was a neutral card in every constructed deck. It's a neutral card in every arena deck that you get to pick it in. So this doesn't affect things at all. If they nerfed it to a 1/1 and they totally just took it out of the game, I would not even mind. So 2/5, I'll bet, and I probably should have run the numbers before this, but I haven't. I'll bet though that even at a 2/5, this is still around an average card.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Probably a little below average would be my prediction, but I don't know 100%.
Right. The fact that it's like you probably won't be able to, because it's got a turn 3 stat line, right? But you probably won't be able to play turn 3.
So there's going to be no curve like whatsoever, right? Whereas it could have been a curve card before, like as a 5 mana 5/5 or 4 mana whatever. So all that's gone. Now, with all of that gone though, like if you just do like based on stats, right? You go from 10 stats to 7 stats. That's what, minus 30%? If you take its current score and you minus 30% the score, it's a 105. Now, a 2/5 is not worth as much in terms of stat distribution, right? It's not the best stat distribution, so you're going to lower it a little bit more, and you're going to lower all of its curve score. But it's still going to end up in like I think the 90s.
Yeah, it won't be unpickable, right? It won't be in the bottom tiers where you see like like the 40s and 50 cards. You're still going to see this, and yeah, you're going to be disappointed in picking it, but you're still going to pick it. So that's kind of where we're at. And now I do agree. I think that like Blizzard, like when they saw how this card was terrorizing constructed, they basically just realized like, okay, this is just a dangerous mechanic, right?
No, they realized they screwed up, right? This is just them admitting that they've not just screwed up the valuation of a card, but screwed up what they were trying to do with the card in the first place.
And I think they just recognize sort of like, it's like when they nerfed Warsong Commander and then they just nerfed Charge. They're just like, okay, wait. Charge is problematic. Just like how putting out free stats that has no sort of no way for your opponent to stop it or counter it. That's a bad idea. So,
and that's also why they changed it to a 2/5. Not just because it's the same as a carry on grub now, but because if you want to make the swing, a 2/5 is not aggressive, it's defensive. And if you're defensive, then you give your opponent more time to react. If you're aggressive, your opponent could die the next turn if it was like a 5/2 or something, right?
Right.
So yeah, so very much applaud this change. I'm sure from a constructive perspective, it's even more impactful. But even in the arena, you're gonna feel this change. You know how swingy Arena is? Arena just got a lot less swingy with this card out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, I've lost to this card way too many times because I think I'm correct in saying there is just no way for me realistically to play around like a turn 5 0 mana Corridor Creeper, from the opponent. There just isn't.
There just isn't. No, it's just bad.
Nope. So
yeah, and we all know the meta right now is one of the main criticism is how swingy it is. It's a little too swingy, and a lot of it is based on the overpowered spells that Blizzard's been releasing, but Corridor Creeper is the one that's in every deck. Primordial Drake is the one that's in every deck. Bonemare is the one that's in every deck, right? So those are your biggest culprits when it comes to the entire meta getting swingy, and they've just knocked one of these down to not being so swingy anymore.
They've knocked all of them, and
are you going to go on to the next one? What's the final card, the most impactful, most frequently seen card that they're nerfing?
Well, see, I thought you were going to use that as a transition. I was like, oh, that's brilliant, and then you had no idea what you were doing.
Such is usually the case.
Exactly. It's a good thing you don't have to show your work in Hearthstone, right? It's not like a math exam.
I would not play Hearthstone if I had to show my work.
I know. That would be terrible. But the final card is Bonemare that is getting nerfed in the upcoming update as well.
Yay!
So Bonemare currently is a 7 mana 5/5 with Battle Cry, give a friendly minion +4/+4 and taunt, and it is being nerfed to an 8 mana 5/5 with the same effect. It is just going up 1 mana from 7 to 8.
Long needed nerf. Don't know why it's
Oh
just
yeah.
happening now. Don't know why it didn't happen in the middle of KFT when everybody realized it was way too strong. Don't know how it made it through testing as a 7 mana card. I remember when everyone first saw it in the previews, right? It was one of the preview card for Bonemare. People were like, "Oh, this is part of like the adventure or whatever." Right? Like AI has this card as a special card, right? It's not like a real card. And then they're like, "Oh no, this is a real card, guys!" And everyone was like, "What? This is just like pure additional stats. You can't do that, you know? Like this is North Sea Kraken, but for 7 mana." And so now it's going to be North Sea Kraken, but for 8 mana. Which is fine, because to be honest, right? Like, if you take North Sea Kraken right now and you make it into a card, it's not going to be that dominant anymore. It's still going to be good, but it's not, like, insanely dominant in this. And Bonemare is our literally highest rated card right now for this meta. In the neutral category at 159, which means it's 59% better than the average card. And Corridor Creeper was number 2. Primordial Drake was 3 at 152, and number 4 was Stone Skin Basilisk at 148. So Basilisk is obviously staying alive because it doesn't have a constructed issue, so that's going to stay there. Primordial Drake doesn't have a constructed issue, and again, both of those are things you can kind of play around or whatever. But Bonemare is hard to play around, because to play around it, you have to always clear your opponent's board, which, you know, that's not the easiest condition to fulfill on every single turn, right?
Right. So with a card like Bonemare, just thinking about how a card like this is created. And obviously, I'm not, on the Blizz development team, but when a card like this is created, there's two sort of there's a tension in creating this card. On one side, there's the principle that big cards have to do something, right? Because they're creating towards constructed. It's like, okay, if players are going to play a big card, especially a big minion, it's got to do something. Otherwise, you have to just make like a 7 mana 13/13, right? And even I don't know if that would even be played in constructed. I have no idea. Depends on the meta, I guess. But so that is one principle. It's like, okay, if they're playing it for 7 mana and if it's a minion, it better do something like big, right? But on the other hand, and this is a principle that we saw a lot at the beginning of the game, and we're really not seeing that anymore, is cards that do two things, especially two like very good things, should cost more. There should be a cost to combining two good things.
Look at Argent Commander. That's a 6 mana 4/2 charge that leaves a 4/2 body, basically, right? Like, it's a 4 mana. And imagine if that card says 4/2 and then deal 4 damage. If a card that is a 4/2 is like probably these days like a 2-drop, and a card that says deal 4 damage we know is a 3-drop. So they should add together to be 5 mana. And this card, because it does both, just like attaches on an extra mana. And you know what Argent Commander is freaking rated on the tier list? It's a 138. It's a really freaking good card. It is a premium card. It's better than any 4-drop. It's like, it's a premium card in the neutral category. And they added an extra mana to it.
Right. And I would say a good card to really highlight at the very beginning of the game, like Blizzard's sort of thought process on this, is like Priestess of Elune, right? Where you look at it, it's a 6 mana 5/4. 5/4 is a reverse Yeti. It should be 4 mana. And then it's Blizzard saying, look, we're doing two good things. One is putting out a minion, which is, just good. And 2, we're healing face. Now, you would not really want 2 mana for 4 face healing. That is not good. But they're like, we're doing two things that are both positive. There should be
1 mana
a
for 4 face healing is like half of a holy heal or whatever. The paladin heal. And that should probably be fine, right? Like, they eventually created a card that's a 1 mana heal 5. So 1 mana heal 4 seems fine, and they just added an extra mana, right? That's what Blizzard did.
Right.
They just, whenever you combine two things, they added an extra mana. And Bonemare is when they stopped doing it and then subtracted mana.
Yeah, and part of it has to do with the power that comes from the most recent cards, and also part of it is just like them thinking, man, we do have to address the fact that if we are going to do something with a really big card, like, and expect people to play with it, it has to be real good.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so in the arena, it's problematic. And just when you look at this again, it's a Bonemare. It's a 5/5 +4/+4 taunt. That is a 9/9 with part of it having taunt. And you can buff anything, so you could just think of it as a 9/9 with taunt. That's like, if you had an 8 mana 9/9 with taunt, that's insane. That's like an insanely insane card. And again, this is the post-nerf card. This is the post-nerf Bonemare. At 7 mana, it was totally ridiculous. Okay, so what's the comparison with Bonemare now? I want to draw your attention to a card that no one seems to have a problem with, which is Charged Devilsaur. It's a 133 on the tier list, staple, premium, well-valued card, a little below Argent Commander. It's an 8 mana 7/7 charge, basically, that can't go face. Bonemare is now also 8 mana, so you can make a decent comparison now. So instead of 7/7's worth of stats charging, Bonemare only has 4/4's worth of stats charging, and that 3/3 becomes a 5/5. Like, the remaining 3/3 of the Charged Devilsaur becomes a 5/5. And that all seems kind of like normal, right? Like, that seems pretty much right. So I think after we redo the calculations for Bonemare, it's going to end up around where Charged Devilsaur is, maybe even a little higher,
right?
Because it can still go face and has.
You're still going to pick Bonemare a ton.
Yeah,
it'll still be a really good card. It just won't be the best freaking card.
Yeah. Like, you're probably not even going to feel it when you're picking it, right? You're probably going to still pick Bonemare every single time, because the difference between, like, let's say a 140 or like a 135, where it's probably going to end up, is not that big, because you're not going to be offered a lot of cards higher than that you're competing with. So the Bonemare nerf is actually only a slight nerf, and it was something that always should have been there. Like, this card should not have been released with 7 mana. Don't know what they were thinking. No one knew what they were thinking. It was, like, immediately criticized, right, as soon as people saw it, for how ridiculous it was. I think it was just like a balance team fail. Not in the core concept that this type of card is bad, like Corridor Creeper, but in a much more basic way of, why did we make it cost that much mana instead of more, as it should?
Yeah, and I think this is a problem here. Where you can identify it as just like, this is just like way too much stats. That's not good.
Yeah, that makes it out of the development process was always kind of shaky. All right, well, those are the nerfs. They're not here yet. If you log in right now, they won't happen. But if you are a slow arena player where you draft the deck and you play later on, maybe keep these in mind, because by the next time you pick up your draft, your game, those cards may look different. Your 7 mana Bonemares will be 8 mana. Your amazing Corridor Creepers that you passed other good cards on will be like a slightly below average card. So keep that in mind.
Also, make sure you dust all of these.
Oh, yeah. Also, dusting all of them is going to get you a good amount of dust, especially Corridor Creepers, which are epic.
Exactly. All right. That's it for the nerfs. Look, good nerfs.
Good nerfs. Great nerfs. I'll go one step further than good nerfs. Great nerfs. You have taken the two most overpowered neutral cards in Hearthstone Arena, and you have nerfed them appropriately, right? Like, it's not, they didn't even over nerf any cards. They have appropriately nerfed these two cards. So, good win for Blizzard. The Bonemare nerf probably should have come a lot sooner, but I guess they didn't. It wasn't as pervasive that they needed to touch it. And the Corridor Creeper's kind of ruining the game. So, the big part though is that both of these are swingy cards, right?
Right.
Like, you've all lost games to Bonemare and Corridor Creepers on a pretty high rate. More Corridor Creepers than Bonemare, I think. But regardless, it's going to reduce the swing in the arena, and that is a good thing, because we are way too swingy these days. So it's good in many ways.
So before we move on, I just want to quickly ask you a question about the card that a lot of people are surprised that didn't get nerfed, which is Ultimate Infestation. Um,
Sorry,
which
sorry. I thought you said Ultimate Infestation, but did you mean Primordial Drake?
See, here's the thing, right? Like Primordial Drake, if you're talking about what is the bigger problem, it's Primordial Drake because it's a neutral card in arena,
Yeah.
right? But obviously, when they're doing these nerfs, they're going to have an eye on constructed, right? And I can also see why they didn't exactly nerf Ultimate Infestation because, to my knowledge, Druid is not like the plague ruining constructed, right? Like they're the best deck was like Big Priest, it was Temple
Okay.
Rogue.
You know the real
But
reason they didn't nerf Ultimate Infestation.
I mean, it's a new card and it's going to be around for a long time, and they want people to play with it.
No, not even that. Bonemare's a new card. Quarter Creeper's a new card.
Oh, fair.
What they didn't do it is because once Druid came out in KFT, they did a round of Druid nerfs. Like I think 2 Druid cards were nerfed, right? Like one was the many taunts thing,
The many taunts thing, yes, and then also Innervate.
and also Innervate. Yeah, so they knew that Ultimate Infestation was a problem when KFT came out, and they said on record very loudly, no, 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 Ultimate Infestation is fine. These other cards are the problem. So they're not going to turn around a couple months later and then say, "Oh wait, we were wrong when we told you all that Ultimate Infestation was not a problem, even though it clearly is," and that we're going to change cards around it for. They've done this before too, right? Like they nerfed a whole bunch of cards. What was the other one? They nerfed a whole bunch of cards around. I think it was like Hunter or whatever. Am I? They nerfed a whole bunch of cards around something like a Buzzard and things like that, right?
What?
Like they kept nerfing stuff around Buzzard. Remember, like back in the day.
This was okay. So if we're doing a little bit of history,
history lesson.
Previous to this, they did multiple nerfs to Unleash the Hounds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they did multiple nerfs to Unleash, and then they before they were just
because that was a combo, right? And you probably don't even know this if you're not like old school player, but it was Unleash the Hounds with what do you call it? I don't even remember the card anymore. I don't even know if it's in Arena anymore.
What, Starving Buzzard?
Yeah, is it in Arena?
Yeah, it is. It's a 5-mana 3/2.
Oh god, that card's still in Arena. Okay,
yeah.
All right. So Starving Buzzard with Unleash the Hounds would draw you an insane amount of cards. And as Hunter, if you draw an insane amount of cards, you draw an insane amount of reach. And then you win the game. Not to mention that, you would have gotten, like, I don't know, you basically spent a mana and a half on the Buzzard in addition to what the body's worth. And then you would have drawn, like, 6 cards from it. So that was always a problem. And so they just didn't admit that Starving Buzzard was a problem. Because Starving Buzzard was, what was it? It was like a 3/2 that was like 4 mana or something? What was it?
Oh, okay. Here's... Because you don't really remember this.
I don't. I just remember it was a good card.
You're like, I think this happened. No. Okay, so here's exactly what happened. And I'll make this quick previously. Hunter was not good. So Blizzard was like, we should buff these cards. And then once I tell you this, it might explain why they don't like buff anything anymore. Originally, Unleash had a different effect. It actually granted friendly beasts +1 attack and charge.
Mm-hmm.
It gave them charge. Like this is like something that they would never do again, right? But then they were so then this would result in like OTKs, 1-turn kills.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no, we don't want to do this. It was changed to the current version that we have effect-wise, but for 4 mana.
For 4 mana.
And then people were like, well, we never played this, and Hunter was basically like thrown to the wayside. And then they buffed it to 2 mana.
That was fun.
They buffed it to 2 mana. Hunter's Mark was 0 mana.
Yeah.
It had always been 0 mana, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people were like, wait, that's weird, because when you pair Hunter's Mark with Humility, it doesn't make any freaking sense. Starving Buzzard was a 2 mana 2/1.
Oh, that's right. It was a 2 mana 2/1.
Yes. So on turn 4,
yes, I remember this.
If they were dominating you even, what they would do is Starving Buzzard, Unleash, draw 3 or whatever. If they didn't have a Hunter's Mark in their hand, they sure did now. And then Hunter's Mark, your biggest thing, kill it, and then use the other 2. It was so
Yep.
Powerful. Yeah. And then
And this was all in the arena too. So like in constructive it would be
yes.
insane, but even in arena, it's like, what do you do? What do you do when they just have these, and
Well,
they're
no.
independently good too? Because
What?
for Starving Buzzard, just to get your card back, right? Like all you have to do is
Yeah.
have one beast. Like how hard could that be for a hunter?
Yeah. So they were like, oh, wait, this is a problem. We're going to nerf Unleash to 3 mana. And they're
Hmm.
like, oh, okay, it'll come out a turn later. And I remember people like Trump and I don't know who else was on. They're like, okay, this should help. And then Hunter just
Continues to dominate. Just didn't even put a
continued
hitch
to
in their
dominate.
step.
And then this is when Blizzard, I think
This is like
something
many
just
months later. Like we're
right,
talking
right.
like 5-6 months after they like solved the problem by moving Unleash the Hounds to 3 mana.
And this is when they just took like a baseball bat to Starving Buzzard and said 5 mana, 3/2.
Yes.
Like, and you know what? I can see because they've identified this as like, wow, this is a really dangerous
Mm-hmm.
mechanic here.
And it also
Like,
makes them unable to make good beasts, right? Like, especially tempo
right.
beasts or beasts with effects. Like, it was a problematic card. Anyway, my point being, this is exactly like the Ultimate Infestation issue is exactly like Blizzard doing the Starving Buzzard. They're not gonna, just when they make the first nerf, even if they're wrong, even if they're very clearly wrong, and I don't know if that's the case with Ultimate Infestation, but I'm telling you right now, in the tier list, Ultimate Infestation is a 250.
Yeah.
Like, Pyros, I don't know what Pyros is, but
Oh
it's a
God.
263, okay? Ultimate Infestation is almost as good as a Pyros. Like, that can't happen. It's just like, you're in bad territory when you're almost as good as a Pyros. So, even like even if Blizzard at this point knows that they need to reduce Ultimate Infestation and that it makes no sense, they're not going to do it because they had only a couple months ago nerfed the rest of the Druid set and declared that Druids were fine, right? In the same way that they had nerfed Unleash the Hounds and declared that Hunters were fine.
Yep.
That's that whole like 10 minutes was just because I was trying to make that point. I'm sorry, guys. I
All right.
apologize for going down this rabbit hole. Hopefully, people who are
And if
newer
you
to
go down
Hearthstone.
the rabbit hole, you better know your history. Otherwise,
I'm glad you're here, or else I would have given a totally incorrect
that's
story.
because I played Hunter during that time.
Oh,
Anyways, okay, so we talked about the nerfs. Looking forward to the nerfs to the two neutral cards, and we'll see. We'll see. I think it's definitely going to help with the swinginess, right?
mm-hmm.
All right. So the topic I wanted to present today, I've called it the finish line. It's
Deep fried meta, the finish
deep
line.
fried meta. Ooh. So what is today's topic about? Today's topic is basically how do you close a game in which you are winning? So like I'm up ahead a lot. How do I not blow this? How do I not be the Falcons versus the Patriots in last year's Super Bowl? Which, if you don't know, they
Oh,
blew
that was
a
so
28
sad.
to three lead.
That was
Yeah, yeah.
so sad.
Anyways, so and then the first question you have might be, Merps, how do you define winning? Right, because winning can be by a lot, it could be by a little. So I've created this definition to hopefully help you guys visualize this as well. The criteria I've made is sort of you're in a situation in which you're ahead by about 3 cards, right? About 3 cards, and both players only have like 2 cards in their hand. So, it's not like a situation in which you're up by 3 cards, but it's like you have 9 cards and they have 6 cards, right? That's not really like a huge advantage here, depending on, and then there's too many factors. So you guys are both sort of, nearing the point where hands are getting to be exhausted. Your opponent doesn't have many options, but you're up ahead by 3 cards, and so it could be 2 of those cards are on the board as minions, 3 of those cards could be on the on the board as minions. But that's sort of the situation where you're at, and that's what we're starting off with. Okay, so you're in a good spot. You're thinking, okay, well, I should have this,
By the way, what
unless
percent of times when you're in this position do you lose? Do you lose? Keep in mind, this is a player with
I
normally like a 75% win rate.
right. I mean, I'm thinking like these are the times in which if I play it correctly, I should only lose like like less than 5%
Less
of the
than
time.
5%. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's how far
Yeah.
ahead you are. So I don't mean that like so this is Merps was a 75% player. If you're like a 50% player, maybe make that like less than 10%. Like you're in a situation where you would lose less than 10% of the time. Like
Yeah.
yeah. So that's how far ahead you are.
Right, right. So this is you're really ahead, and then this is when you want to think, well, what would I lose to? How do I close out this game? How do I make sure my opponent doesn't swing? And these are the times in which you see us perhaps take a long time with plays, even though we're up huge,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
But
chat will
we're
always be like, "Come on, like move it along." But sometimes otherwise you may lose, right? The debates are
right.
still helpful.
So I've categorized this into sort of three groups. What you want to think about is just you want to ask the general question: how do I lose? Right. So I've separated it into three categories. The first category I want to talk about is face damage. This should be fairly obvious. Like your opponent is running out of cards, you're up on cards, but one way you can possibly lose is just burst damage, right? Before you can swing your 5 minions to their face, they kill you. That sucks. So, what do you do in this situation? Number one, you have to recognize that this is a class that has access to face damage, right?
Hmm.
I would say, a class that is very common is like Shaman, right? Shaman has quite a few ways to deal damage, just spells out of their hand. And then, secondly, you want to also identify like ways in which the class deals face damage. So,
Yeah, and
druids,
this is very important.
yeah,
You can start with Druid. I'm going to start with Paladin because
right,
this is the big issue with Paladin. Like we all know Mage could potentially have Pyroblast. We can debate whether you play around Pyroblast or not, or whether you play around Fireball Ping or not. Um, but if you have taunts in your hand, you can be a little more okay with face damage from certain classes like Paladin, right? Because a lot of Paladin's reach is double True Silver to the face or triple Vine Cleaver to the face. And if you can prevent that, then what's Paladin going to do to you? Like, hammer you to the face? That's only 3 damage. Like, you've changed the class's reach from 12 to 3.
right. So this, I think, two general principles you want to use, when you're in this spot is number one, duh, maybe don't use your face anymore.
This is like so not duh to people though. I feel like I
No,
have to
no, yeah,
justify so many decisions on stream when people are like, "Oh, you should just do that," and I'm like, "No, no, no. I know I have 15 health, but I don't want to take even a single damage on my health. Like my weapons go face, right? Like I
right.
will trade another minion into this. I will take a bad trade because I'm up that much." That I'm not going to make the most efficient or highest tempo play or save a card.
Right. And number two, don't use face. And number two, sometimes prioritize taunts, right? So, you could drop something like really big here, but if you're, up against Paladin and they're like, well, there's a chance he could just top deck the True Silver slash Vine Cleaver, maybe prioritize taunts, even though, if you can only drop like an Iron for Grizzly versus like, a 7/7, right? If you're up
Mm-hmm.
ahead on the board a lot,
Yep.
all of those things get tossed out. It's like if I have, let's say, 13 mana's worth of minions on the board, my opponent doesn't really have anything, and I'm putting something else out. I don't need another 7/7. I
Mm-hmm.
will put out the like 3/3 taunt. Or if you have like a Tauren Warrior, I'll put out the 2/3 taunt.
Yep.
I just need that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people are like, wait, this is like super obvious, but some people are just like, well, I need stats, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm
I don't
going to
know if
close
it's
this
super
out.
obvious. I see people make this mistake all the time, and it goes steps further too, right? Not just what you put out. So let's say you are needing to trade on the board in an efficient manner, right? And you
Mhm.
have a nesting rock on your side that has a taunt, and it's a 4/7. Your opponent has a 4/4 minion on the board. You also have a 6/4 on your side that doesn't have taunt. Like, trade the 6/4 into the 4/4. Don't take the good trade if you're up on the board by that much, right? Like,
Yeah,
if you are very far up on the board, uh, your taunt is what's keeping you alive. Keep that thing healthy. Like, I'll use the taunt up if I have like 20 health. I will not use that taunt up if I have 10, even though nothing's going to kill me at 10 damage.
Right. And lastly, and this is where you have to really think about what classes can do, and if they're still holding on to a card. This is it requires a little bit of reading, but get your own lethal. You know, because if you're in a
Mm-hmm.
position in which you are worried about face damage, that means in 1 to 2 cards, and a lot of times just one card, you know, they could top deck something that can kill you.
I would say
Right?
only in the one card top deck situations do you need to
Yeah,
worry about this, or in the
yeah,
my
I
opponent
agree.
is a hunter situation. In which
Yeah, yeah,
case,
yeah.
if you keep delaying, he's going to get to the one card situation.
Right. So this is an easy situation in which, let's just say they are purely top decking, right? They're purely top decking, and let's say we're facing like a rogue that has a 2/2. You have a taunt, and it's like a somewhat beefy taunt, and then you know, you're at 4 health, right? And you know, you have a choice of, let's say you have a 5/5 or a 4/4, and that thing can either kill the minion, or it can like go face, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you want to ask yourself, based on the class, it's like, what are you really afraid of here? You know, it's like if the rogue top decks like a plague scientist, it can't even activate it. If the rogue, you know, top decks an assassinate or a sap, you know, it only has the 2/2 and the dagger, it gets you down to 1, which is like scary. But if you had already set up for lethal and you just kill him after that, it doesn't really matter, right? And look, there's a lot of other factors, and there might be a hole in my situation that I said, but this is where you want to like really think about, well, how does this really impact me? Like, even if they get the hard removal, even if they get the sort of AoE, like, do I still set up my own lethal, and do I really fear like this thing being on the board? And then a lot of the times, this will cut down their draws by 1 turn, which, you know, um, is potentially the card that just kills you. So
Yeah,
make sure you try to set up your own lethal here.
yeah, and again, one card, right? If it just takes them one card to kill you, and even if they get other cards that like hurt you a lot, you are still not dead, and you can recover because you were so far up. Then why not take that chance? Because the chance is not that you die. The chance that you take is that you get set behind on the board, so you're no longer like 8 mana ahead. You will only be 4 mana ahead, right? And that's a worthy risk to take because you're minimizing your risk that they have more turns to top deck their like kill command or whatever. Um,
Yep.
yeah. So that's that all covers the face damage thing where you're worried about face damage, right? Remember, we're up a lot. The situation to crossing the finish line is you are up a lot. What are you worried about your opponents doing and how that should guide your play? This is not like what to normally do. This is a you have to start up like your situation is this is whatever turn and you're up a lot on the board.
Right. So with all these situations, you are ahead a good amount.
Mm-hmm.
Now, okay, I think that is a good sort of discussion about the face damage. Now, the second category I want to talk about is AoE. And
Mm-hmm.
these are I'll label them the super AoEs.
Yep.
Okay. So we're not just talking about a volcanic potion
Everything
here.
is going to be super here because you're so far up, right? Like your opponent
Right.
needs to have super face damage, also known as reach, right? Which means they have to have that pyroblast or top deck that pyroblast or get the vine cleaver or whatever. Your opponent has to have super AoE because they have to flip a lot of things on the board. Or
Right.
your next category is going to be super value,
Yeah.
like because they need to have super value, and they correspond to the 3 ways that you can win the game. You win the
Mhm.
game by reach, like by being aggressive and hitting your opponent to the face. You win the game by out-tempoing your opponent, or in this case, flipping the board on your opponent. Or you win the game by having way too many cards than your opponent, right? Which is the super value. Like, these are the ways they win the game, and each of these has to be supersized if you are up for your opponent to actually win the game over you.
Right. Remember, in the situation that I've laid out, essentially, they have 2 cards, you have 5 cards. Now, I don't mean actually like you have 5 cards in hand. Like, once again, 3 of those cards could be like minions out there, right? You can have like a 6/6, like a 3/3, and like a 4/5 or something like that. And those would be sort of like 3 cards. But yeah, you are ahead a ton, right? That is a lot. You should definitely win from this situation because you have card advantage and you have initiative, and they are running out of options. So like very not too likely to have like some crazy combo that they've like saved up for a long time. Now, the situation I want to talk about is super AoEs. So this is your Psychic Scream. This is your Twisting Nether. And in a way, I'll talk about it, Primordial Drake as well, right? And certainly Primordial Drake will be sometimes like better slash worse than the other two. But let's talk about just Psychic Scream and Twisting Nether for a little bit, because these are the most sort of pure removals, right? So if you are winning by a ton and you are facing a priest or a warlock, obviously, number one, if they're saving a card for a turn and not doing anything, okay, like let's be a little bit careful, right? Because what's happening right now is you are still doing the calculation. How much can I expect from my opponent next turn? How much tempo can I expect? And if you have more than 10 mana's worth of tempo, or if you have a little bit less than that, but you have like a hard removal in your hand, or just extra damage, even something like a Shadow Bolt, something like an Eviscerate, right? Something in which you can help on the board as well. You don't have to put out the extra minion. You don't have to sort of try to go even faster. And once again, this is sort of going to be class specific, right? So against a shaman who has Volcano, and maybe the health doesn't, like, it's still under 15 or like close to 15, you don't want to you want to be careful. Up against priests and up against warlocks, you want to be careful. Up against like rogue, you're like, okay. You don't really care about that. So once again, it is class specific, but if you're winning by that much
No
against
respect
these,
for the vanish. Just zero respect.
I know. But if you're up against those classes and they're not putting anything down, or if you count your men and say, I don't need to put something down to take care of their top deck, right? Then you're good to go. So like you don't have to just keep on like mindlessly churning out stuff and like building upon your board, and then suddenly they get a Psychic Scream, and because you've committed all 5 of your cards onto the board, you guys are now even, right? And that's a terrible spot to be.
Yeah. Always preserve some advantage so that if your opponent does play these cards, you are still up by nearly that much. So, like, if you're really up by a lot, like, because Psychic Scream is also a card. Let's say he has 2 cards, you have 4. You have 2 on the board. He Psychic Screams, he has 1 card, you have 2. And you're about to draw another one, right? Like, that's fine.
Right.
On the other hand, if you have only 1 card on your hand, then now you're even, and you're in a problematic situation.
Right. The next card I want to talk about, and it deserves its sort of own category with an AoE, is Primordial Drake, because it's different than Psychic Scream and Twisting Nether. But Primordial Drake is also, you might think of the AoE as only 2 AoE, but because it taunts and it's a really annoying 4/8 body, it's like a lot of times when it's used, it's like a super explosive shot, right? Like a really super duper explosive shot. I think that's a decent way to think about it, because you have to hit into it with your minions, and maybe you even have to take a couple of cards from your hand as well. And so with Primordial Drake, it's a little bit different because now you're thinking about the health of your minions, right? So if it's like so if you're in a situation in which, for example, you can keep something at 3 health and bump one thing to like 1 health instead of like making both 2 health, do that. Like that's so important, especially if we're talking about like a 5/3, right, instead of like a 5/2. So just make sure you do that, and this is a good exercise with a lot of classes. And I understand a lot of classes have like different breakpoints, right? So like with warlocks, for example, like 3 is not that uncommon, so you adjust accordingly. But you have to think about Primordial Drake if it hurts you that much. I would say Primordial Drake is definitely one in which you can make it much more awkward for your opponent, but because it's neutral and because of the annoying 4/8 body, just math it out on the board and think, If they drop Primordial Drake, do I have enough to take care of it and some extra to, like keep my offense going? And number two, can I manipulate the health of my opponents in a way to just better prepare me for the Primordial Drake?
Cool. Yep. That's
Okay.
that's the AoE way of flipping. And finally, we get to super
Super
value.
value. Okay,
Um,
so I had two cards here, but obviously there is the Big Daddy card, like legendary neutral as well. Yeah, I've been talking a lot about this. Did you want to jump in with
Yeah, sure. So super
yeah.
value is like you talk about. We're talking about the swing, right? Like your opponent has to swing it back somehow. With face damage, it means they get just enough face damage to kill you. With AoE, it actually takes over the board. Super value is this weird mix of they manage to stall you out until you run out of cards, while ending up with more cards than you, even though they start out at like a -2 or -3 card disadvantage, even. So that means they need like one card or one combo or something that will actually get them more than like 3 extra cards. Like that one card has to be equal to at least 4 cards. So sprint is the most baseline way to do this, and it's not very good at doing this because they
No.
also skip a turn. And you remember this is the case in which you have a whole bunch of cards too. So then you just put more cards on the board, and rogues can't deal with a big board, and they die. So
Right.
sprint only works well if they can sprint and then eviscerate something, or sprint and then sap something on the same turn. Otherwise, it's not really that big of a deal because it set you up to just win the game very quickly in the next couple turns if you really were that far up ahead. Um, so the ones that really matter are Ultimate Infestation. Obviously, it just keeps the tempo on the board with the 5 damage and the 5/5 while healing you and then giving you 5 extra cards for a total worth of 7 cards or plus 6 extra cards. You're not gonna. I'm not saying I didn't like outlast an Ultimate Infestation before because I was so far ahead. That actually happens somewhat frequently, but you have to be like not just ahead, but really ahead against a druid to be able to like feel comfortable just because of Ultimate Infestation.
Right. So up against the Ultimate Infestation, this is a really difficult card to quote like play around. It's just because it does so much, right? It not only deals 5 damage, gives them a 5/5, which it can use the next turn, and also gives them 5 health, which is really annoying. That 5 health
It
matters
also
a
gives
ton.
you 5 cards.
Yes, it also gives them 5 cards in which to probably get removal, and then they, But one of the things I've sort of begun evaluating with Druid, as it gets to turn 10 and as the game goes on, even past turn 10, even when I initially know that they don't have the ultimate infestation, sometimes I'll ask myself the question, because one of the problems with Druid is just lack of hard removal, right? Like there's naturalized, but people still don't draft it that often. Like I don't find myself playing around naturalized the same amount that I would play around even like an assassinate
Mm-hmm.
in Rogue, which we have rated lower, right?
Yep.
So with Druid, sometimes I'm just like, okay, well, I'm up ahead a decent amount. Ultimate Infestation is a problem. Like, what else is really a problem here? And with Druid, they play
Nothing. So you
nothing.
push.
You push,
You push
and lots of
hard.
right, and lots of times people are afraid of a bone mare, which I totally understand. But you can do a calculation. You're like, I survive a bone mare, or
Yeah.
like if they bone mare, I still win because of this face damage. But if I keep on like playing this ticky tack sort of
Mm-hmm.
trade, gain advantage here, gain advantage there, gain a card here, and then the ultimate infestation
Into some taunts.
into some taunts,
You're
I
done.
lose.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
done.
So for ultimate infestation, do the calculation and then do sort of like a other than ultimate infestation. What's the worst case scenario? And lots of
Mhm.
times like a bone mare, right? And if you're like,
Yeah.
well, I can take care of a bone mare, then you're good to go.
Yeah. So other ones, mind control kind of does the same thing as a sprint, except it does it on the board. It has a
Yeah.
precondition, which is that your opponent plays a giant minion, but then you kill the giant minion being worth about 2 minions worth of tempo generally, right? Like say a free from amber or something, and then you mind control that, and then you get the 2. So it's a total of a 4 card swing using only 1 card. So it accomplishes the same thing as sprint, except it's all on the board, so you don't actually lose tempo on it. You actually gain a whole crap ton of tempo. So that is a huge flip that you have to watch out for. And again, if you're worried about mind control, Like, don't play big things if you don't have to. Or if you play a big thing, make sure like you have a poisonous minion also on the board, right? Or like you have a hard removal in your hand. Like make sure you can deal with it before you play the big thing.
Right.
Mind controls also usually like if they're holding a card for a while, even if it's not mind control, it could be a psychic scream or whatever, just something else you don't want to play a big card into regardless. So it's definitely one of those not too difficult to play around cards if you are actually up by a lot. It's really devastating if you're not up by a lot, and so you have to play your big card so that you can keep contesting the board.
Right. So look, if you're winning a lot and you have the luxury of
Mm-hmm.
holding back a little bit, especially like, look, if you have, let's say, like two mid-size minions, right? Like you have, let's say, even like a 6/6 and a 4/4, and in your hand you have a Mastodon, and you have just like a 5/5, right? Maybe just play the five
Yeah.
five. Like it's
If
fine.
you put the
Like
pressure out, they're gonna have to burn the mind control on something at some point, or they're just dead.
right. And also it's like a lot of times when you play around mind control, you're also playing around psychic scream, right?
Yep,
You don't want
exactly.
that Mastodon removed.
So yeah, I mean that's the super value cards you mostly have to worry about. Anything that gives you like any one card that gives you 3 cards worth of stuff, you don't really have to worry about. Like
Right.
Aldor, for example, would even qualify as one card that gives you 3 cards of stuff because it basically gets rid of something.
It's a little bit harder for your opponent to pull that because it more heavily depends on your minion, right?
Yeah, I mean it's
As
mind
well.
control, same thing,
Yeah.
right? Like you could play into an outdoor without worrying
Right,
too
right.
much about it. Is my point because that only swings 3 at most. That's also why Bonemare is not something that you're really concerned with because
No.
Bonemare swings by 3 at most. Like
I
those are not cards that like get you over the hump to actually make a comeback if you actually are that far ahead.
Right. Now, so I will say, and in the super value category, the last thing we can talk about is the one that we always ask about. It's like, how do we play around Deathwing?
Oh, I thought that'd be under
That's
AoE. You didn't talk
no,
about it. I
no,
was
no,
like,
no,
oh, we're just not
no.
talking about
It's not.
legendaries.
It's not under AOE because in the 12/12 body counts just as much as the AOE, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's more like a sort of like it is an AOE,
It's
but
all 3
it's
because
it's it's really all three.
you
Yeah.
Deathwing and then you go face. That's 12 damage if your opponent doesn't have a removal or a taunt, right? That's like a lot
Right.
of reach. It's AOE that obviously clears the board, and it's super value because it clears the board and is a 12/12, which is like more than 2 cards probably, maybe like
Yeah.
3 cards even.
So for Deathwing, it's like, how do you play around this, right? And lots of times you can't really think about top deck Deathwing because that's like super duper rare. Like you can play around top deck Psychic Scream, right? If you're facing a priest, that's like meh. But top deck Deathwing, not very often. Deathwing, a lot of times you should be able to read whether they've been holding the card for a super long time, or they played something like a Bone Drake previously and they got it right, or Nether Spite Historian and they've been holding a dragon for
Mm-hmm.
a long time. Now with
I would say
Deathwing,
those last 2 are the only times you ever want to get a Deathwing read. You don't want to like
yeah,
just be
yeah,
looking at your opponent's behavior and then being like, he has a 0.001% card. Like you don't want to do that. That's not worth it. You're gonna get
yeah, yeah.
misreads way more often than it's gonna actually be helpful.
Right, right. So I would say for Deathwing, there are a few ways to prepare. Number one, similar to the other super value cards in which we talked about, it's go face, right? It's like go face if you are not in danger of dying, and even when it's like, okay, well, they have a minion on the board, and if they bone mare, I'm still okay, right? Like them
Mm-hmm.
bone maring doesn't do enough, even with all of that value and initiative. So go face. Secondly, if you have a hard removal in your hand, I see people do this a lot. It's like if you're winning a lot and you could just trade some minions
Yeah.
in and save a hard removal, save that hard
It's not
removal.
even just like Deathwing. Like they could play a bigger problem. Think of like Yasha Rajas that, get a giant taunt. Think of like I don't know. Like there can always be a problem, right? There are the ridiculous cards in this game. You don't want to be using it on an 8/8.
Right. Um, so save that. Or if you don't have that and you're developing a board, I would always like save a basilisk, save a
Mm-hmm.
snail, right? Like just do that. Like I would designate that minion as like, okay, unless Deathwing comes out, or unless, crazy stuff happens and I just need it, right? Like if you
Mm-hmm.
need it, obviously play it. But it doesn't seem like I need it, don't play it. And this to some people will seem just as obvious as like, don't use your face when you're afraid of face damage. But it's something which I see a lot of people are just like, no, no, it's good. So I'm going to put it out there. And once again, these are very niche situations. And even when you think about it, you're only going to increase your win rate by a tiny amount. But once again, this week we're talking about the situation in which you're winning big. Let's just get to the finish
Yeah.
line. Like, don't choke, don't trip up.
Because
And
that's the problem, right? It feels so much
yeah,
worse if you do end up losing from a dominant position, and especially in this meta, it happens much more frequently than it did before. But a lot of it is still preventable, and after these changes to Bonemare and Corridor Creeper, it's going to be even more possible.
and I will say, sometimes you will still lose. Even when you play it, I'll say the correct way,
Yeah,
you will still lose. But
you could
if
cut
you're
that
taking
percent down
advice,
like
yeah,
very significantly.
yes, and very significantly will still be a very small
Mm-hmm.
portion of your overall win rate. But that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to raise your win rate.
And I
So
know we're
hopefully,
like we're talking about this like very minute, like very specific stuff, but as you become a better player, or if you're already a good player, this matters a lot because you're in a dominant position much more frequently, and you have those like, oh, this crazy thing happened losses like a lot more because you put yourself like, how do you put yourself in a position to get the board flipped on you and lose? Well, you have to be dominant on the board first, right? You have to be a good player first to like more frequently get in that situation. So then you are going to lose. And if you are a good player, you're going to win in those situations a lot. So you're only going to lose to these ridiculous things. And if you only lose these ridiculous things, then the next step is to make sure you lose less frequently to these ridiculous things.
right, instead of making them have an amazing top deck, force them to have
Two amazing top decks,
top decks.
which they will have sometimes, and you're going to be
Yeah.
mad, but you can only do so much.
All right. So that was good. I thought that was a good chat.
Yeah. Question from the GOAT. What do we have for a question from the GOAT?
All right. Question from the GOAT. Comes from the real Nitsa on Twitter, who asked both of us. Question from the GOAT. If you could be best friends with one Hearthstone card, what would it be?
Ooh. Best friends with one Hearthstone card.
I know.
That is a tough question. What do you have?
Okay. Well, I think there are. Okay, I'm going to lay out sort of a thought process first, and I think this
Okay.
might help you out a lot
Okay.
because I've not been thinking about this. First of all, I think you want a person, because this is best friend. You want something that you can actually hang out with and would like appreciate. Your
So is this first of all, is it
companionship.
like a friend as like an equal? Like are you also a minion? Or are you still the hero and your best friend's a
No,
minion?
no, no. You're just hanging out. Like this is just like we're not talking about the game. It's like you're just buds with this, with the entity inside of the card. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Right, right. So, something like, well, first of all, it has to be an actual living thing. So, like, no to crushing walls.
Well, I don't think you want to be best friends with crushing walls anyway.
Well, if you're best friends with crushing walls, maybe it won't crush you.
Ah.
But no, no. Or you could just not go next to the crushing walls. That's cool too. Also, no to things that probably don't understand your existence, like corridor creeper. I don't know. I don't think that worm is very high on the intelligence scale. So that's out, right? So I think we're dealing with like humanoid creatures and like kind of like high mammals or just like mythical creatures,
I
right?
think you're nicer than me. Like, why wouldn't you want to be friends with like Embrace the Shadow?
Because it's not a thing.
Well, I
Like
mean, if
embrace
you're
the shadow
friends
is a
with
spell.
yeah, but if you're friends with Embrace the Shadow, then you can turn all healing effects into damage effects. That feels pretty good. Or like a greater healing potion. I'm just looking through the cards. Oh, or mind games.
What
Wouldn't
would
that be fun? You can just pull a random thing out of anyone you see.
Uh,
You could get their deepest, darkest secrets randomly.
okay. See, I just wanted someone I could like go grab some food with, but you know,
Who would you go grab some food with?
uh, see, I don't know. Like, I was thinking, I'm like, do I want like a person? Like, but then I don't think they'd survive that well, like in sort of like
Oh,
this
you're
world.
going real literal. You're like literally putting them in an apartment in DC.
Right, like you're best friends with them.
Oh God. Okay.
I know,
All
I
right.
know.
See, I'm going way less literal with this question, but okay, go ahead.
Oh, see, I think I would just like, I'm like, okay, no, I would take like a snow flipper penguin, like best buds. We just
Oh,
like
that's
hang
cute.
out. Yeah, exactly. Like that would be cool. And also, I like kind of understand a penguin. Like if I were to choose like a mana worm, right, like a worm, I'm like, I don't really
Yeah.
understand you, like
Mana
your
Worm would not be a good
biology,
best bud. And you
what
can't
you
cast
do.
spells, so you can't even make him grow. He'll be sad.
Right. Also, I think I don't want anything with like an incredible like size disparity, like Deathwing, like that just I don't think that would
But he's
really
your
work out.
friend. He won't hurt you.
Yeah, I mean I think he'd want to like hurt everything else, so that's probably a bad idea.
Hmm.
Um but that's kind of the way I thought about it. I'm like penguin would be nice. There are some other, other animals that might be okay. But yeah, there's not a lot of like very friendly animals, I feel, in the cards. So that's my take on it.
Okay. Okay. Well, if we're going literal, because if we're not going literal, there are so many things that it would just be like so nice to like, have on your side, right? No? Like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the spells will be good to have on your side. But if we're going literal, uh okay. Animal Companion is always a good choice, I think. I may have to no longer live in New York City for that to happen, but I'm willing to make the sacrifice if I can actually have Misha be my buddy. All right, that seems pretty cool. And it's Animal Companion, so you can get all three effectively. Oh, sorry, the better version of Animal Companion. What am I even talking? I want all three. Call the
Call of
Wild.
the Wild. Oh, I was
Call the
like, yeah,
Wild.
you could just call of the
You
Wild.
call the Wild. That'll be pretty insane of a best friend group to have, right? Like go live out by the forest and then do cool stuff. I would enjoy that.
Okay,
Um,
that's fine.
so I think that's a pretty easy choice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Babbling Book might also be cool.
No, why would you want a book that's like babbling all the time? That feels like an awful like annoyance.
No, I think I would enjoy it. I think I'd have a high tolerance for it. Also, just give me some spells. So
I mean, the other one I was thinking of, and this is because I'm fat, is funnel cakes. Like, let's be honest, how cool would it be to have funnel cakes as your best friend?
but does he actually give funnel
I
cakes?
don't know what he feeds you something.
Yeah, it's like a chicken leg.
Oh, is it really? Okay, so even better. I have no idea what the hell funnel cakes are. I know I like chicken legs. Priest of the Feast. Now, I can't cast spells, but presumably
Yeah,
he'll
I was
take
gonna
care of
say,
it.
how do you activate that?
He'll activate himself. I don't know.
He's your best bud. He'll find a
He'll
way.
find a way. He has a lot of stuff,
Okay,
right?
okay,
Like, that's the point.
okay. All right, that sounds good.
All right.
Good question.
So, good question from the GOAT. Question from the GOAT brought to you by patrons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thanks for feeding the GOAT, everybody, and thanks for keeping the lights on here on the Lightforge. All right, we'll end this. We're not going to do a class talk because we're running out of time, and it's
Oh yeah.
Rogue anyway, and there's not much to say about Rogue because it's been nerfed to hell, and it's still okay. You're just playing like a class with a hero power. Like, I don't know what else to say about it. But the card good bad I want to bring up is Green Jelly. Green Jelly, currently rated a 110 on neutral. It's a 5 mana 3/3, and it generates 1/2 taunts every turn it's alive. Which is cool because the 1/2 taunts protect the 3/3 body. It's like a hogger. And you can perpetually generate these taunts as long as you leave your opponent with only one minion that can attack each turn and they don't have a spell. So we're actually going to raise the score of this card a little bit in the next update, I think, and that has to do with we're doing some tweaks with abilities, and part of it is going to slightly raise the score of this card, but it's still generally going to be around like a low premium kind of card, or like a above average card in your deck. What I want to talk about more is less like how it's why it's good in situations and when it's bad in situations, and more just like how do you play this card, right? Like, because this is one of those cards that you could play it right and you could play it wrong. Like, the easiest way to play it wrong is to play it like a normal card. Like, you can't play it like a 5/5. That doesn't quite do it. So, what happens when you play a card, or any card similar to Green Jelly, where you basically can't use the body that it's putting out? Because the value of the Green Jelly isn't generating these 1/2 taunts repeatedly. It's not in the 3/3. So if you have to trade it in the next turn because you need its initiative, that's a bad situation to put the Green Jelly. Instead, what's a good situation to play the Green Jelly is a situation in which you are over-tempoed on the board or in your hand for the next turn or two. Like, between your spells in your hand and your minions like on the board, you can take care of what your opponent puts out the next turn, right? So then you don't have to use the Green Jelly's body, and then it can keep generating the 1/2s, which is what you want. Now, on top of that, or a different situation where it would also be good, is when you've already worn your opponent out. Like when you have put enough stuff out there that your opponent would want to remove, and they haven't. So you are pretty sure they have no more removals left. Or that their removal that they have left must be like a large removal, right? Like if your opponent assassinates the Green Jelly, that's not the end of the world. But if your opponent frostbolts the Green Jelly, that's pretty bad. So you want to get all the small removals and the like board clears of 3 damage or more all out of the way first, and then you play the Green Jelly. So that even if your opponent has 1 minion on the board that you're not removing, so it's not a clean board, like even if you're not actually ahead on the board, this Green Jelly can effectively neutralize like a 7/7 worm. Because if your opponent can't get through it, you can't ping your 1/2s down. Like, then they just can't get through, right? And then you can go face to get the lethal, or you can, whatever, right? Like, you can basically freeze one of your opponent's minions, which is an insane ability to have every turn.
Yep. That's my contribution. Yep.
So,
no, I mean, look, it is important to think about this because what you are expected when you put a minion down, lots of times you expect, it's like, oh, I have this much stats. But the importance of the stats matters a lot, right? Like you kind of can't kill off. I mean, you can kill off the 3/3, but you don't want to kill off the 3/3. So you want to think about, well, on the next turn, in the ideal world, I really only have the 1/2 that I can do something with, and the 3/3, I can kill off like,
a
a
1/1.
Yeah, a 1/1, or if it's a non-pink class, I can kill like a 2/3.
Maybe.
But otherwise, I don't want to use this 3/3, right? I want to keep on generating these taunts. So it's definitely different from just normal minions in which you're like, okay, I wait a turn and then I get the full use out of its stats. And because if you use it normally, you're not getting that much stats. You're getting 4 attack for 5 mana and not that much health, right? So you're getting a significantly worse Silverhand Knight, which is not the way you want to use it.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Any last words about any of these before we move on?
No, I think that's good. And I like to talk about the finish line and what to do when you're up big, and hopefully we can use that in today's run.
Yes, because rogues are known for being up big all the time.
Oh yeah,
it's the perfect class for overwhelming your opponent on the board. Rogues. All right. Anyway, looking forward to the nerfs. Love the nerfs. We'll see you guys next week. Just another reminder: next week is also going to be a Friday Lightforge / Arena Coop, because I'm going to be going on vacation after this, and so the Lightforge after the next one is going to be pre-recorded, and then we go back to a normal schedule. So it's going to be a little a little wobbly in February with shaking up the schedule. And if you want more information, I will do a full like schedule thing on Reddit sometime in the next couple days to kind of tell people what's happening with the schedule. Yeah, that's it from us. Until next week, this is Adwicta.
This is Merps. See you guys.
Enjoy Super Bowl weekend.